Well, one of the biggest things that I learned from Jim as he showed me how he did his buck beds at the time, creating back cover and, on the military crest overlooking bottoms where, a deer he could smell everything behind him and see everything that he couldn't smell, was that I needed to log my property. That the best thing I could do at this point was to get it logged.
Phil Lincoln bought his first farm in 2012 and has since had some of the best whitetail habitat managers in the space help him develop this farm. Here's what he's learned. He's had Tony LaPratt help him. He's had Jim Ward, Don Higgins, Jeff Sturgis, and you get to hear about some key takeaways he's had from each one of those folks and how he's been able to apply it to his own land. And also some of the benefits about land is maybe not always about killing a big deer. And this is what Phil has to say. Here we go.
If it's worth something significant, let's get it out here. Let's get the regrowth. Let's get the food down where the deer can reach it, and save the good trees, get rid of the trash, get rid of the stuff that's marketable. And I don't regret any part of that.
Phil, how's it going?
Jake, I'm doing well. How about yourself? I'm enjoying this beautiful, humid, hot Midwest weather.
Well, we just got doused with rain here, so it's headed your way. So we got probably an inch of rain here this morning, which is can't complain about rain in July.
That's right. It'll be here tonight, and my already saturated lawn and food plots will continue to be soft a little bit longer, but everything's growing great. So.
Yeah. Well, everyone likes to complain about the weather. It's never perfect. So.
It's never perfect. No such thing. There isn't a state out there that everybody wants to move to. So
maybe California, but there's a lot of reasons to not want to move there. And probably the tsunami right now or the earthquake.
That's right. That's right.
So
I grew up in the mountains of Northern California, so I can certainly contest to that. It's a really cool state with a lot of diversity, but it's got a lot of craziness going on too.
Yeah, 100%. So I want to dive into that. So Phil, who are you? We've got to talk here a little bit. I'm really excited about this conversation. You've lived a very interesting life, and all roads lead to whitetails in my world. And it sounded like that was the same thing for you. But tell me a little bit about yourself, because I think a lot of people will enjoy it.
Yeah, so I grew up in Northern California. I went to Alaska in the Air Force right out of high school. I met my wife, who was also up in Alaska temporarily. We got married, moved back to Alaska, raised a set of twin daughters, our only kids. I was a stay-at-home dad with them for the first 8 years of their life. And during that period, my wife got accepted to to graduate school at Johns Hopkins in Maryland. So we moved from Alaska to the East Coast for a couple years while Jennifer went back to school. And, every once in a while, Jennifer she'd be like, you know what, I got a lot going on. I got some serious testing. Why don't you just load up the girls and go to mom and dad's, which are Indiana, where she grew up. She said, why don't you go hang out, for the long weekend or whatever, and, give me quiet. Well, that turned into, hey, I think I'm going to take the girls and go to Indiana this weekend. Archery season starts. And since my father-in-law at the time was a school teacher and retired soon after that, I had options for places to hunt around around the area. And I don't know what it is about whitetail hunting, but I got totally hooked. Now, I guided in Alaska in addition to hunting for the whole almost 28 years we lived up there. And I think other than wolf and maybe hyena in Africa, I think the whitetail is the hardest critter on the planet to hunt. I really do. It's kind of funny. I compare hunting mature whitetails to playing golf. It's impossible to shoot an 18 in golf, so there's always room for improvement, right? And I feel like whitetails are the same way. You just never truly completely master it. There's always room for improvement somewhere. So that's how the whitetail bug started for me. And then fast forward years later, we bought the farm that we actually live on now as kind of a escape from Alaska, and now we've moved here, and the girls are grown and gone, and we live here full time.
real quick, if someone wanted to go to Alaska for the first time to experience the beauty, the remoteness, the wilderness of Alaska, what species would you suggest for someone that just wants to dip their toe in the water?
Ooh, that's a really good question because I get that quite a bit. June, July, and August are the best months to go, especially if you're interested in fishing. Um, Moose, bears, caribou, they all have their challenges. And the biggest thing that I can say about hunting Alaska, even if you don't need a guide, because you don't need a guide for most of the species, is everything has just gotten so expensive. It's just so expensive. Caribou on the North Slope, really cool. You're up in the Arctic. There's a lot of carriers that'll like just take you out and drop you off, and you can hunt them on your own. There's some floats. That's it's kind of an easy thing to do. There's lots of them. If you get lucky on the weather and the timing, you can see thousands, but at the same time, it can be kind of bleak if your timing's off. Moose is expensive. It's hard to find a good area. They're huge animals. It takes major planning, tons of meat to get out that take special backpacks just to carry hindquarters. Brown bears, of course, you have to have brown bears, sheep and goats. You have to have a guide. So there's really not a simple answer to that question, but
Hmm. So it sounds like
caribou,
caribou would be the answer then.
caribou's probably, yeah. So from Fairbanks to the North Slope, which is like 500 miles of dirt road, right? There is a 5 mile corridor on either side of the road that is archery only. I can't imagine how many hundreds of thousands of acres that is that's archery only, but it's archery only all the way to Prudhoe Bay, the North Slope of Alaska. And so you'll get a lot of guys will like fly into Fairbanks, rent a vehicle, and there's companies that just specialize in it now, drive that, 12 hours north and basically hunt caribou off the road system because you got 5 miles each direction where nobody's going to be firing a gun. And it's because of the pipeline runs through. They don't want anybody shooting a gun with the pipeline. So
Interesting.
it's probably the biggest archery only area in the world. I mean, it's just astronomical big. But there's also a lot of nothing out there too.
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah, I couldn't even picture. I couldn't even picture what that looks like in my head. I can try to, but I can't even
Right.
picture how vast that probably feels.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
so oh, go ahead.
No. I was just going to say, just the state in general is just so big. People don't, you see it on a map and it doesn't look big, but then when you overlay Alaska on the United States, you realize just how big Alaska actually is.
Yeah, I remember. I don't know. I remember this, but I remember there was a milk carton in grade school, and I don't know. It was like Texas, California, Alaska, and some other state, and like which one's the largest state? And it's like the way they did it, it was to trick kids because they made
Yeah.
Texas look huge, and then you look at you flip the thing upside down, it's like Alaska. Oh, okay.
Right. Right.
I
Well,
don't know why I remember that.
the funny saying, which is always a poke at Texas, was if you take Alaska and you cut it in half, Texas is still the third largest state. And if you take Alaska on low tide and cut it in thirds, Texas is the fourth smallest state
Wow.
or fourth largest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's insane.
It just has so much coastline that it's unbelievably big. It really is.
What year did you get bit by the whitetail bug? Do you remember what year that was?
So I think actually where it like turned into an obsession would have been like 2001, maybe two. It's while the girls were little and we were in Maryland. And I would, for a couple years, I came out quite a bit. And of course, what grandmother doesn't want to spend all day with grandkids while you're in a damn tree stand, right? So that's when I think it really sunk in to the point where I started flying down from Alaska to do it yearly,
Hmm.
take, line the time up and come down. And then we bought the farm that we live in 2012. And that's when the whole management side of it and just being obsessed with making the land better just kind of went crazy. Because then I
Yeah.
had my own piece of my own chunk of dirt to make better or worse depending on the choices that I made.
Yeah. In 2012, uh, when it comes to recreational ground, feels almost, I don't want to, it was just a different time. There was way less information.
Really
It wasn't
was.
as popular. It was a different time. I mean, it's 13 years
Yep.
ago, but
Yep.
at that time, how did you develop a plan of like, okay, this is the farm I want to buy? Because now people can, get a lot of information where maybe it might paralyze them from making a decision. But I have a feeling that you made a pretty well equipped decision based off of some form of information. So what was that?
Yeah. So, well, I mean, part of it was I know guys that own ground in counties that are known for Boone and Crockett bucks, right? So their driver was, where are the best genetics or where are my best odds? With me, I wanted to buy ground close to family. So I was kind of limited to the area. But coincidentally, I actually hunted this property years before I bought it because my now neighbor became a friend in all my trips down. And he said, if you want to go back behind the house and hunt, the guy that owns it lives out of state and he won't mind if you hunt it. But the land, the 80 acres that we live on has a lot of diversity. It had, two commercial ag fields, about a 12-acre field in the southwest corner and about an 8-acre field in the northwest corner. And then some elevation. I mean, the property just had a lot of things going for it. Elevation's good. If you look at a map and you just look at, the property's this wide and this long, that doesn't really tell you. I mean, that tells you how big it is if it's flat. But if you've got hills and hollers and stuff like that, I mean, you've got all these nooks and crannies that are extra square footage, we'll call it, that, you can take advantage of. Now, one of the things that I've learned is a lot of elevation difference. If you've got a deer bedding up here and you're trying to hunt down here, guess what? You've got deer that are sleeping in the bleachers with a great view of what you're trying to do. So it's good and it's bad, but yeah, this place just kind of checked off all the boxes. We looked at several properties, one of which a friend of mine bought specifically thinking deer, and he ended up selling it a couple years later. So it was kind of one of those deals where, and I consider him a better whitetail hunter than me. So I figure I kind of somewhat dodged a bullet on that one. But yeah, this has been a great piece of property. It's really diversity is, I think, the biggest thing it's got going for it.
Yeah. Do you think that I've thought this before, but do you think there'll be a time where someone puts in AI or some sort of tool where you have all the topographical changes and it's like it's 65 deeded acres, the actual land mass is 75, 80?
Yeah. And I mean, there's no reason why at some point you could ask AI, I'm looking for edges. I'm looking for diversity. I'm looking for old pasture. I'm looking for, the different things that we look for as deer hunters. And, the things that AI can do now are borderline scary in my opinion. But yeah, that's interesting. I've never actually thought about that, but
yeah, that'll be the next wave. It'll be, are you buying the deeded acres or are you buying the actual surface acres?
Right.
It sounds crazy today on July 30th, 2025, but I'm telling you, it might not sound crazy 10, 15, 20, 50 years from now.
Yeah. Well, when we bought the property back in 2012, podcasts weren't a thing. And so, and cell phones were even relatively new, if I'm remembering correctly. I mean, we're talking flip phones and, candy bar phones.
Yeah. If you want to know where property boundaries are for public or private, you want to develop a great plan for your farm, document perfect access to a blind, to a tree stand, carve out and measure food plots, connect your Moultrie trail cameras to an app that shows exactly where they're at, and you can look at the feed for that specific camera location, then Onyx is something you need to check out. It is the only mapping software I use when it comes to deer hunting. I've tried other pieces of software, different apps, and I always go back to Onyx because I think it is the most comprehensive, easy to use, and robust mapping software there is when it comes to hunting and land ownership. You want to send a pen to a friend, boom, send it to him right to text, opens it up. Maybe you have notes, maybe you have pictures on that pin, transfers all of it. You want to send a whole entire folder of a plan that you mocked up, you can do that on Onyx. So be sure to check out Onyx. They are a huge supporter of the Land Podcast. They allow us to travel around and talk to some folks that can give you really good insight and good information no matter where you're at in your process of buying land. Let's get back to the conversation. Was this the property where you live now? Was that listed for sale? Because you said you had hunted it in the past. How did this come about?
So the guy that I was telling you about that bought a piece of property that we looked at and then sold it later actually lives and still lives on the edge of the property. And he was kind of the local caretaker for it, had permission to hunt. A couple other local guys had permission to hunt it. And he always told me that one day he was going to buy it. I mean, we basically bought his backyard. And coincidentally enough, he actually bought the other piece that we passed on. And then the gentleman that owned the ground that we live on now died. And his two sons took it over. And his two sons went to Brian, the neighbor, who was the kind of the caretaker, and said, hey, do you know anybody that might be interested in the property? So we actually bought it without a realtor. It was just kind of one of those deals. And what was funny is I was in Alaska, and obviously cell phones were a thing then, because I got a text from Brian and it just said it's available. And I knew exactly what he meant. And so I called and, we worked out the details, and eventually we got a couple people a little bit smarter than us to, kind of bridge all the gaps. But yeah, we bought it. We bought it then.
When you bought it, did you feel like you got a fair deal, good deal, gave you heartburn? Where did it fall at?
At the time, the property was so ideal as far as location, possible building site, the hunting history on the property. I mean, everything in our minds, everything warranted, a fair price is a fair price is a good deal, right? I mean, I don't think we didn't steal it, but I don't think we overpaid. And looking at, today's prices, holy cow. I mean, it's,
you feel real good now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
So we had talked previously, and so you buy this farm, and then you've kind of gone through. You have a master's degree in whitetail education, and when I say that, it's somewhat tongue in cheek from the idea of who you associated with, who you were able to learn from, and so I want to dive into kind of what that progression was, and maybe what you learned from each one of those folks.
Yep. So right off the bat, when we got the place, and we started coming down, I don't know, a couple times a year, just to spend time here, relax. There's a little pond in the front yard, so we can do a little fishing and whatever. And the buddy that's still my neighbor that lives close is a big whitetail hunter, and I was like, boy, I'd really like to make this better. I don't know how to do that, but I'd like to be able to come down from Alaska and be able to, focus on deer hunting for a week or two. And he told me about a guy named Jim Ward, who I think he has property in Indiana and maybe family ties to Indiana, but I have also heard him talk about Kansas, and he travels all over doing habitat stuff. He's kind of the guy that made the term buck beds popular. I mean, he's done some YouTube stuff on buck beds. Yeah, I don't see much of that anymore. I think he's just so busy dealing with people that he just doesn't have time to promote his business. He can't take care of everybody that want him. But of all the guys that I've talked whitetails with, Jim was by far just the best overall woodsman. I mean, as an example, we walked the property, and he took me over to this spot, and he said, all right, come over here. This is something I want you to see. And he said, what do you see here? And I said, well, there's a deer bed, and there's a deer bed, and there's a deer bed. He said, yep. And he said, so what do you think's staying here? And I said, well, there's multiple beds. I'm guessing, maybe a small doe family. And he goes, well, they may be using it, but here's what's happening. You notice how all these beds are big, and they're on different sides of this knoll? I said, yeah. He said, this is where he's sitting when the wind's blowing from here, and this is where he's sitting when the wind's blowing from here. And you notice when you stand in every one of these beds that you can see everywhere around you. I said, oh yeah, this is an elevated, it's right off the end of a knob. So he said, this is a textbook big buck bed. He said, I would be willing to bet you that potentially the oldest deer in the area is sleeping here when he's not being run out. And he said, let's take it one step further. And so he'd walk off and he said, when a buck is bedded here, how would you guess he's using this area? He said, what are your clues for that? I said, I get to looking around. I don't know. So he starts looking at the vegetation. There were rub lines. And basically, the long story short is he said, that buck is coming into this area. He's probably leaving this direction because of the rubs. And you see this is yellow aster, and this is, bumbleberry bush, and this is this, and this is this. You see how he's nipping off these ends, and he's doing this and doing that. I was amazed that somebody could just look around at the vegetation and just know what this buck was doing. And I mean, I've never been around anybody that was just so in tuned to the environment at his level, right? And so the biggest thing that I learned, one of the biggest things that I learned from Jim, as he showed me how he did his buck beds at the time, creating back cover and, on the military crest, overlooking bottoms where, a deer he could smell everything behind him and see everything that he couldn't smell, was that I needed to log my property, that the best thing I could do at this point was to get it logged. And so my friend Brian, the guy, the one that made the purchase possible, was a logger, and worked for a logging company. He worked for a sawmill, and he said, yeah, I can walk it and give you an idea what kind of timber's on it, whatnot. So the interesting thing that I learned about logging is not everybody has your best interest in mind, right? So when a logging company comes in, or a timber company or whatever, they'll say, we figure there's X amount, we'll give you 20,000 for your trees. And the contract says we've got 2 years to get it out, right? I mean, that's a typical contract, a long period of time, allows them to adjust for weather, whatever. And right now we'll give you X amount for the trees. And people say, oh, great, $20,000 for, trees that are just going to grow old and die eventually. But it's the 2 years that's the kicker, right? Well, he got loggers in that spring and got it done right away, which never happens. And so that was a connection thing. I mean, it could have easily screwed up, 2 or 3 deer seasons. Instead, it really only had an effect on the first one after they logged. But here's the other thing that people need to know that are selling timber. They came in, they started logging, and because my buddy was in charge of the logging operation, there ended up being some black walnut that ended up qualifying for veneer wood. And he told me, he said, Phil, you're going to get a second check for $9,000 because there were some trees in here that were way better than we thought. And so we ended up making a third more off of our trees because we had a connection with the logging company. So best thing I ever did to the property was log it.
How big were those trees? I mean, was there, because it was based off the recommendation from Jim that you need to open up the canopy. I mean,
Correct.
What was there?
They took a little over 500 trees off of 76 acres.
So it's pretty hard cut. I'd say that's pretty hard.
It's pretty hard cut. I mean, it had been logged before, but it had been logged quite a while ago. And the other thing I told my logger friend was, let's not clear cut it, but if it's worth something significant, let's get it out here. Let's get the regrowth. Let's get the food down where the deer can reach it, and save the good trees, get rid of the trash, get rid of the stuff that's marketable. And I don't regret any part of that. I
Mhm.
mean, it probably wasn't. It may have not been logged ideally if you bought the property just strictly to log it every 15, 20 years.
Mhm.
But Brian being a deer hunter, he knew that that was my drive.
Mhm.
So he used his judgment and did a good job.
No, that's powerful. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people where the best habitat tool is a chainsaw, and doing it. I think doing it right is the harder thing, and having someone like Jim to make sure that you're doing it properly is probably the missing link for a lot of people. And I'm just
Yep.
assuming and observing.
Right. A chainsaw or a drip torch.
Yeah,
Those are
or
the
both.
two things. Those
Yeah,
are the two things that, people that are really in the know will tell you are major, major benefits to the deer.
yeah. And so, anything else with Jim Ward? Because I mean, I have a whole list of kind of the Phil
No, Jim.
masterclass here.
So I never, Jim, I worked with Jim. I worked a trade out with him. I actually went and worked a client property with him for a couple days. I came behind him with a bag seeder and spread some stuff and, kind of stood out across the woods where he was doing a hinge cut. He is by far one of the hardest working guys I've ever been around. That guy is like a wrecking machine. He doesn't stop. He doesn't check his phone. That guy is every tree's worst nightmare. I've never seen anybody hinge trees like that guy before. He's a quiet guy. He just, I don't know. He had a huge impression on me. And that's probably what started the craziness that just like I couldn't get enough knowledge about how do I make my property better. And so after Jim, so now we had this logging period where I didn't know how long that was going to take. So it wasn't like, hey, Jim, can you come back in 6 months or a year and a half or whatever? Um, from then, I took Tony LaPratt's 2-day whitetail boot camp up in Michigan. I actually flew down from Alaska for that, hit the farm, got my farm vehicle, drove up to Michigan. And to be honest, of all the money that I've spent taking classes, dealing with habitat managers, whatnot, the best money that I've spent, bar none, was taking Tony's class.
Really?
I think I learned the most stuff about creating habitat, deer move, basically just making your hunting better, just everything about habitat. Tony is the most out of the box thinker I've ever run into. That guy has forgotten about things most people have never even dreamed up might make a difference. I
What's an
mean,
example? What's an example, or what's something that stuck with you?
um, well, he's kind of fierce about sharing his information, but like as an example, I one of the things I encourage people to do that I talk to that are thinking that want to learn more about management, as I say, go to his website and type in his address on Google Earth. And if you're not scratching your head after looking at Tony's 57 or 55 or whatever acres of highly managed ground, if you're not scratching your head, then you've probably got no business trying to make your deer property better, because you'll look at the aerial and you go like, holy cow, what is going on here? And as you zoom in on the difference, I mean, Tony is very much compartmentalized property. The more lines of movement, lots of small food plots scattered around the property versus one big one in the center, withdraw. He's all about keeping a buck on your property for long periods of time versus a buck comes in, checks your big giant food plot in the middle or on the edge of your property, and then 10 minutes later he's on your neighbor's property. Tony's philosophy is, I want that buck on my property from the minute he comes out of his bed until it's dark. Once it's dark, he can go on the neighbor's property. I don't care. I mean, as long as nobody's poaching or breaking the law, he'll be mine tomorrow at, just before dark again or whatever. And, but, as an example, in one place, Tony took an excavator and basically made, I don't know really how to describe it, but it's basically like a 6-foot hole deep trench, like 100 yards long. He took all this dirt and stacked it up here. So now you've got a mound here and a hole here, and the hole holds water. So it's now built-in water hole, but it's this natural bridge that makes deer go around both ends of this embankment, essentially. Supplies water, moves deer in a predictable manner. I mean, his property is just full of stuff like that.
Buck Land Funding. If you don't know who they are and you're looking to buy a piece of ground, I encourage you to reach out to them. They're chartered in multiple states across the Midwest, and they understand recreational land. I've said it a million times here on the podcast. The most important piece of buying your first piece of ground is finding a partner, finding a bank that understands what you're trying to do, that has competitive rates and understands the world of recreational land, because not all banks are created equal, and Buck Land Funding understands our crazy goals of scooping up a piece of ground to enjoy it with family, to hunt it, to use it as an investment. They understand that and work with that every single day. I encourage you to reach out to them. If you're in the process of buying your first or 20th farm, reach out to Buck Land Funding at bucklandfunding.com. Back to the conversation. Did you implement, was there something that when you left that boot camp and now you did it to your farm and you're like, man, I wouldn't have thought about it. And B, obviously if I didn't think about it, I wouldn't do it, but you did it. And it's like, holy cow, that worked just like I was supposed to.
Yep. The favorite stand on my property. I don't sit it very often because I like deer to feel safe there. I kind of go in when I think maybe I can, have a shot at a target buck or something like that. I actually put in a small pond, and I did it in such a manner that was relatively close to my tree stand. And then the bank of the pond is between the base of my tree. And then I grew miscanthus on that so that I could sneak into the stand behind the miscanthus, climb up a tree without deer knowing I'm there. The miscanthus keeps the deer from going between the water and the base of my tree. But then what it does is then it moves the deer around the end of that, around the outside of the pond, which now puts them away from my tree and out in a better place where you got a better shot angle. And then on the other side of the opening, at times I would have deer move around, and they're just out of range in this opening. And something I learned from Don Higgins on his place was, Don's got a place where he's got a long piece of 4-foot high snow fence. It's the old metal stuff with the little wood slats in it. And all he did was he put that in so that deer worked like this and then went around versus go through here. And so what I did was I brought in some of that fence so that now I have a hole between the pond and the fence. Now every deer that comes through there walks through in bow range. And then I took it one step further, and on the end of that snow fence popping out, I put multiple scrapes. So now I've got reason for deer to walk through this space between the pond and the end of the snow fence. But then I got a reason for them to stop broadside or just spend time. And that's all from Tony, just thinking about, how do I get the deer to do what I want instead of trying to find a deer or trying to find a tree that allows me to get to where the deer are already moving. Tony's really big about moving the deer where you want them.
I just looked up his farm on Onyx, and it's a lot.
There's a lot going on there, isn't it?
Yeah.
And some of it may be a little excessive, but he can tell you, he's got a reason for every single stone that he's got on his property. He's got a reason for that stone being there.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned, so we have Jim Ward, TSI, Tony LaPratt on the boot camp. And then you mentioned Don Higgins. And so I think this is a fun little story when we were talking. He has a moose in his office. And tell me, did you have anything to do with that?
Yeah. So I actually, right after we bought the property and they had it logged, I got to know Don and Kevin Boyer, his original partner in the seed company. And Don actually came and helped me plant cedars, the original cedar trees that I planted for screening on my property. And so I told Don, I said, when Don started consulting, I said, Don, I'd really be interested in you walking the property and telling me what you would do with it. And so I kind of worked a trade with him where he came up and he hunted moose with me, and he put together a plan for me how he done it. Now this was super early in his consulting career, back when he was by my terms affordable, but yeah, he put together a plan for how he would maximize the property. I'll tell you a funny Don Higgins story. We're sitting in the airport in Anchorage getting ready to fly out for our little bush hop to moose camp. And Don he's got one of those candy bar phones and he's punching buttons and you can just see he's frustrated, right? And I went over to him. I said, what are you doing? He said, this is when EHD first got to be kind of a big deal. And Don ended up losing like half of the big breeder bucks on his farm while he was in Alaska with me. And so we hadn't even made it to the bush yet. And Don's wife was like kind of freaking out, like what is going on, right? And Don's trying to manage it over a phone where he's pushing the one button 3 times to get a C, and then the button number 7 twice or whatever. Yeah. And I said, Don, have you heard of predictive text? And he was like, I don't even know what that means. I said, let me see your phone. And I scrolled through the menu and I set up predictive text, right? Where you could just push each button once, and then the phone was smart enough to figure out what word he was like, Phil, you just changed my life. He went from being a guy who would not text at all to being a guy who was like catching up with everybody that had sent him a text that he'd blown off because all of a sudden funny. It was manageable. Anyway, yeah. So yeah, the problem with Don's habitat plan was I knew deep down inside he was right. It was the best way to kill a mature buck on the property. The problem is that it eliminated all access. I basically needed to he wanted me to put a big food plot on the edge of my CRP field and then basically use the rest of the farm as a sanctuary. And my wife was like, we didn't buy 76 acres to like never, ever step foot on it. So we kind of cheated and yeah. So the important notes that I got from Don that I could take advantage of, I did, and what I couldn't, I just said, well, maybe I'm never going to kill a 200-inch off mine because I'm not willing to put, I'm not willing to be that dedicated, I guess. But that was probably what continued the obsession going. I mean, after I had Don on the property, I was following Jim Brauker for years and years. Him and Jake Ellinger up in Michigan, they're both big Tony LaPratt philosophy of chopping a property up, compartmentalizing, lots of lines of movement, move the deer towards you through food plots and lines of movement, that kind of thing. There was a period of time where he offered for like $250. You talk to him on the phone for half an hour. He'd look at the aerial and he would then get off, take an hour, map it all digitally and send it back to you and explain to you what he did. I still have that map to this day. It's kind of cool, to see, just to get somebody else's opinion. I mean, I don't think you can truly set a property up without physically setting foot on it. Mm-hmm. But using topo lines, you can kind of get an idea of kind of what's going on a property. But what
was the key takeaway from Jim?
Just how just another example of moving deer around the property. Jim was really big on multiple food plots instead of one food plot. Don had a big 1 acre field real close to my house, and then everything around it was a sanctuary, but with one predictable place to shoot a buck off of that, out of those late beans or whatever. depending on the wind, where, you know, Jim was like, well, you could put a stand over here and a stand over here for this wind. And I mean, he had stands scattered around the property, you know, with the wind blowing into your neighbors, but taking advantage of a buck moving around the property, you know, checking multiple bedding locations and multiple food plots versus I can kill him here in one spot eating. Mm-hmm. That was the biggest thing is, you know, a lot of the same, you know, Tony LaPratt philosophies when it comes to that.
Yeah, we just did a live event last night on the Whitetail Master Academy, and Skip Sly was on it, and this was one of the questions that brought up, you know, chopping up your farm in a lot of different ways, and it does seem to be a very big Michigan thing. Like all those guys are from Michigan, which the Skip synopsis, and he's from Michigan as well, was essentially you had to do all this crazy stuff to try to get a deer to that point, and there's other parts of the country where maybe you don't have to, or maybe it'd be even that much better.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I think it's very regional. For me, I think it's very helpful to have places for deer to hide, because we have quite a few neighbors. And when you have neighbors that hunt and you don't have, you know, 200 acres or 400 acres or whatever, you know, you kind of have to make those adjustments. And, you know, I help some people. I do a little bit of work for other people. And I basically feel like it's my duty to do the experimenting on my property versus somebody else's. So I spend a lot of time on my property that I probably wouldn't spend if I was, you know, hardcore on killing a booner or whatever. I have a couple other places that I have permission to hunt that I don't feel like spending a lot of time on my property is keeping me from killing my next big buck. I haven't shot a good buck off my property in forever. I haven't even really hunted a lot recently. I've had some friends kill some nice ones off of it, but yeah.
Why do you think that is? Because someone's thinking, you know, like, well, if it works, why not?
Because I'm really picky at what I'll shoot, but you know, I'm not going to tell a friend from Alaska who's never killed, you know, a decent whitetail that he can't shoot a, you know, 3.5-year-old buck that scores 150, the biggest buck maybe he'll ever kill in his life. Yeah, I'd let it grow. And you know, when I was young, it was all about, you know, getting something that was successful. As I've gotten older and gotten softer, to me now, hunting is more about the people that I'm doing it with and the relationships versus being successful. To me, spending the time with the people, you know, going on an out-of-state trip with friends or whatever, that's the payoff. And to see, you know, somebody shoot a buck off my property that I would have passed, and the joy and excitement they get out of that, I don't know. I'm not that hardcore. Yeah. I'm not that hardcore.
No, I get that. I think sometimes we can all be our own worst enemy. It's easy to get selfish, I guess, is the easiest way to say it.
And here's the reality of it, right? If I don't pass him, he's definitely not going to get bigger. But from my experience, even with all of the habitat work I've done to my property, I hold decent bucks for the area, right? I hold good bucks for the area. The problem is it's so hard to get one to 4 when all your neighbors are willing to shoot them at 3. I mean, I have passed so many bucks that I just prayed one more year, and they just don't make it. I mean, now if I implemented and made my property a 75-acre sanctuary, that might be that, you know, that would, and hunt it the way Don would hunt it, that would probably make a difference. I will admit it. I'm just not willing to do that. I guess I don't want to, you know, a booner off my property bad enough to
make the associated sacrifices.
To lose. I mean, you know, we have 2 CRP fields, right? The 2 ag fields we turn into CRP. And that's another thing to look at when buying a property. I mean, if you've got commercial ag and you're not planning to farm it yourself, I've heard you talk about government programs, fully support. I mean, it's just a win-win-win, utilizing those programs. But in one of our fields, not so much anymore because the species have changed. But when it first went in, there was a lot of milkweed and stuff in it with this program. And there were times in the spring where you could go back. My wife and I, we just like take a cocktail after dinner and we take the 4-wheeler and we go back there and or the side by side and we just sit there. You just watch like literally hundreds of thousands of butterflies as you're watching the sunset. And I mean, how can I tell my wife we can't go do that? I mean, that's like, that's like one of her joys for the month is going back there and seeing that a couple of times a year. I can't take that away from her.
Moultrie has had an exciting month. We had the integration with Onyx. We had the launch of the Edge 3. And most recently, the launch of the Edge Solar. The Edge Solar, you never have to buy batteries again. Has a built-in solar panel that's fully adjustable, comes with a rechargeable lithium battery, and out of the box, ready to go. You don't have to buy an SD card, has internal storage. Very excited about the Edge Solar. Encourage you folks, the next time you're out at the store, ready to buy a camera, give the Edge Solar a try, check out the Edge 3, and support the show. Connect the dots with Moultrie.
Yeah, no, I think that's a healthy way to look at it. Now, I'm just going down the list of my notes, and then you had Jeff Sturgis. So it's like you've had a lot of people that come to mind when you think about a habitat consultant, someone that's going to maximize your property. You've visited with all of them.
Yep. So Jeff Sturgis was the only person on the property that I didn't like work out some kind of a deal for. I literally just paid him what he wanted. He was like, okay, I'm going to be in your area on such and such date. Can you make this work? And I mean, he came by the property. We walked the whole thing. We literally sat in a Mexican restaurant in town, and he drew up a plan on an iPad while we ate. And he emailed it to me after he left. It was, and Jeff is kind of Jeff's plan. Looking back now and seeing other plans by Jeff, his was real typical of others that I've seen. Food scattered around the property. Getting deer to move around your property, not necessarily trying to get the deer to all come to one place. Again, like all of these consultants out there, I'm sure Jeff has changed some of the things he's doing, fine-tuned some of the stuff. I've heard of Don, having clients put up, giant fences for long. I mean, that's not necessarily affordable for some people, but if you've got a good chunk of property that's got great potential and you want to try and kill a 200-inch deer, that may be what it takes to do it. And so, Jeff, the thing that was cool about Jeff is I didn't walk the property with Don. I actually set it up with Don, and Don walked the property while I was back in Alaska. Jim Brauker, of course, did it all from an aerial photo. I've never met Jim. I've talked to him on the phone a couple of times, watched all of his, YouTube content. Jim and I never did really actually put a plan together. He pointed out key things to take note of and enhance in the future. So actually physically walking the property and real time talking about it with Jeff Sturgis was actually really cool. I learned a lot from him, stand placement. He said, well, why don't you have a stand right here? And I was like, well, it's hard to get from here to there on it or whatever. And he's like, well, but based on, this elevation and the fact that this is steep, there's probably a lot of deer walking through here. Well, you're not seeing that they're walking through here because you're never sitting in a tree stand there. And if you've ever put a trail camera there. So he kind of opened my eyes to, he opened my eyes to alternate places to put tree stands, places that maybe I never really thought about because, I didn't spend a lot of time there, or I'd never sat close to it. So I never actually physically sat and watched what happened in a whole evening of, prime time deer movement. I don't regret any of the folks that I used. I think the take home with habitat managers, if you're going to hire somebody to help you with your property, I think one of two things is going to happen. If you truly don't know what to do, right, and you haven't listened to every podcast and YouTube clip that's been done, I mean, everybody has beat this subject to death, right? Then any one of the folks that are offering, I'll come to your property for a price, walk it, draw you up a plan, tell you what to do, tell you where to hunt. Anybody that is willing to do that is probably going to help you. And everybody that's doing it is probably got the same core strategy in mind. It's just the slight little tweaks and little differences that the individual players are using, how they've had success in their hunting careers or whatever. So if you're one of those guys like me who, went through the QDMA and took their deer steward, went to Tony's class. There's a guy up in Wisconsin that offers a one-day boot camp on his property. I couldn't get into one of his classes, but I was up there traveling, doing some other stuff, and I met him at his property for the day, and we went through his folder that he gives out to his. We talked about everything. I basically took his class without taking his class, so to speak. I forgot where I was going with that.
Who was that?
Guy's name's Jeff Helmers, and Jeff has a 40-acre property that's basically a big hill. It's a big hill. He's got a cabin at the base of the hill. He's got bedding areas on either side of the hill, and he's got a beautiful food plot, water, fruit and nut tree orchards, everything on the top. And basically, he's about the only guy I know who for years, I'm not talking a year or two here and there, but for years, him and his daughter have killed either both of their, or if they only had one at the time, one of the two killed their target buck literally with one or two sits a year by timing and being in the exact right spot based on how they have it set up, right? So they stay off their property. They've got all the deer coming to these big food plots on the top. He sells seed and does some consulting and some other stuff. Super nice guy, has a lot of content out there. But he's also got this property that's perfect to do what he's doing. So he can say, okay, we're not going to go sit in this tree stand overlooking the food plot right next to the water tank and right next to the big apple tree that has apples falling off of it and 5 scrapes under it until we get that first cold front of the year. So he can almost from year to year just bide his time. Oh, the temperature is going to drop tonight, goes up, sits in that ground blind, shoots the biggest buck on his property, and him and his daughter do it every year. And I mean, they've got years and years and years of doing it. So I learned from the biggest thing I learned from Jeff is timing your sits based on the weather, right? You can go sit day after day and hope that a buck walks by, or you can time it and, with some reasonings for why you're in that one spot. In this case, it's food and a drop in temperature makes that food plot the place to be. And so they're killing their target buck early before the rut even starts, before the craziness of, the craziness and the unpredictability that comes with the rut.
Yeah. I'm getting new podcast guest ideas. I'll have to reach out to Jeff, Jim, and Jim. I wanted to get Jim Ward on a podcast for a while, and honestly, I've never tried reaching out, but
he's a great guy. I love Jim to death. He is the most quiet, humble dude you will ever meet. He is like a mountain man in the woods. That guy he knows what every forb and flower and bush and grass. I mean, he knows everything. He knows what the deer eat. He knows why they eat it. He knows what time of the year they eat it. That guy is like a walking encyclopedia. I can't say enough about about Jim Ward. I mean, that guy's, you should really have him on. Your biggest problem is going to be, your biggest problem is going to be sitting him down long enough to do it. This is how efficient Jim Ward is. This is no kidding. I've seen it. This guy, when you pay him to hinge cut or to work on your property, this guy is so fierce about getting work done that all of his chainsaws, this is going to blow your mind, all of his chainsaws, the two nuts that hold the side plate on, that hold the bar on, he's taken one of them off of every one of his chainsaws. So when he stops midday to get a drink and change chains halfway through, it saves him time not having to take one of those nuts off. I'm not exaggerating.
He's like a NASCAR pit crew.
I forget what he says, but he claims I don't even want to say a number because I don't want to butcher it and I don't want to cut him short. But I mean, he can cut down like 1,500 or 2,000 trees a day in a paid day or some crazy thing. I mean, it's just, the guy is a freaking wrecking machine. He's the hardest working guy I really have ever been around. I mean, he's a get her done guy.
Yeah. So with your experience now, you've gone through the gambit of, bringing in a lot of outside, perspective. You bought your farm, you've worked on it. What's one thing you wish you would have known before you inked the deal on buying your first farm? Is there anything you would have done differently, or something, someone calls you, hey, Phil, I'm thinking of buying a farm. I know you've got a lot of expert opinions. You worked on your own farm as well, but is there something you wish you would have done different?
Not really. No, I mean, I really feel like, the timing's been good on everything. There were a couple places on the farm, kind of deep in the heart of it, where I share a fence line with my neighbor to the west of me, who owns just a little bit. He owns like 110 acres. And I'll tell you what, buying a piece of property, neighbors can make or break a piece of property, right? And, my neighbor, Randy, he's a commercial ag farmer, so he knows food plots. He was the guy that laughed at me when I was down from Alaska and I was out here on my little old Ford tractor putting in a food plot that, failed 10 minutes after I left on a plane back to Alaska. And then he came in with his giant, massive equipment, dropped his drill and in one pass planted an acre food plot that was going to be just a total bomb when I came back in, October or November. I didn't do any hinge cutting or any major manipulation in that part of the woods because I felt like that wasn't the place I wanted to learn on. Right. But, stumbling in a gym right off the bat and realizing that I needed to log it sooner than later was the single smartest thing I did right off the bat. And everything, I think, as I've learned and studied and taken classes and hired guys to come give me their opinion, I think the obsession has all just gone in the right direction from the beginning. I really don't regret. I guess the one thing I would have done is my south field, I actually leased it out to my neighbor who's an organic farmer. And I thought if I could have him planting organic clover to feed his cows, then I'd have a 12-acre food plot out there that I didn't have to manage, but I'd still make the same amount of money as if I had a neighbor, farming it for corn and beans. So he's like, yeah, I'd do that. And he put a fence in on our property line so he could get his equipment in and out. And, looking back, I probably would have just put that into the CRP program as soon as it was eligible. Instead, I ended up doing it 2 years later because I had a verbal contract with him, and I wanted to let him decide when he was done. That's probably the only thing I would do different, just simply because those two fields. Now I've heard some information lately on drone studies, and it might have been your podcast, and that's really got me rethinking warm season grasses. But
I want to, yeah, I'll interject really quickly because I had the same kind of hearing that. It's like, man, it seems crazy.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of that flying was done obviously in November, and then he said no, November through January. But I
Yeah.
want to have Jack on and ask a lot more follow up questions because
Yeah.
I
That would
wanted
be
to
great.
I wanted to cover a lot instead of go deep into one topic. But I think
Right.
as he flies more farms and gets more experience, and if I give him, hey, this is exactly what we're going to talk about, because I think that
Right.
was the biggest question mark when we recorded that, because it was
I
somewhat
was I
quick.
was talking I was talking to a couple of friends and they're like, "Holy cow, you got to give me the address of that. I got to hear it because, you hear all these people say, you know, what's the one thing that you could look for on ground or what's the one thing you could do with like a big overgrown or if you're going to turn a pasture into deer habitat, what would you do with it?" And I think Andre DeQuisto was recently quoted as saying, let it go wild, warm season grasses, CRP, whatever, right? And CRP stands for Conservation Reserve Program. So when people refer to CRP, they're actually referring to a program, not actually the warm season grasses.
Yeah.
That's kind of a little pet peeve of mine that I'm
Yes.
not sure.
It confuses
Yeah,
people. It can
it
confuse people.
confuses people, right? So the two programs that I'm in with my two fields are were designated for the Henslow sparrow and the grasshopper sparrow. So my fields are tall grass. One of them is in a couple different kinds of switchgrass, some other forbs. My front field is in some shorter stuff like big blue stem, little blue stem, and a bunch of forbs. The deer, they love them both, right? The backfield is has become switchgrass dominant. Don would probably love it, but I mean, in my backfield, you could hide a Tyrannosaurus Rex in that. It is so thick and so tall. Um, my neighbor's son hunts a stand right on the property line, and he says he sees an unbelievable amount of chasing and use of that field that I never see because I never hunt any. I don't really have a place to hunt around it. So
Mhm.
the biggest the biggest problem that I've had by making my property so thick and so chopped up and so diverse is that almost immediately I quit seeing deer. And that's kind of like, my neighbor's like, "Oh, I saw 15 deer out in the field tonight, and I saw, you know, whatever deer over here by my food plot, or they were going, the whole herd of deer went through the holler behind the house this morning." I would never see any of that stuff. And for a while, I kind of started getting a complex about, damn, I'm not seeing any deer on my property. But then I'd get in my side by side and I'd go through this big horseshoe trail that goes through and comes back. And I'd look over and I'd see two deer standing 15 yards into the thick, and they wouldn't run off because they felt comfortable, right? Because it's so thick. And what I basically learned was that because I made my property as good as I physically could, short of clear cutting the whole damn thing and just turning it into a giant mess, which deer would love, but it's visually horrible. Um, I had all these deer living in this, and because I wasn't seeing them didn't mean they weren't there. It just meant that I couldn't see them. They were just happy deer everywhere, hidden. But hidden is why I was getting pictures of, shooter deer at noon working scrapes when my neighbors were only getting them working scrapes at night because, deer feel comfortable coming out during the day, especially older deer, if they feel secure and they're not going to come out on the edge of an open field with a road driving by and work a scrape at, a 5-year-old buck's not necessarily going to work that scrape and expose himself to the road. But in a hole in the middle of nowhere where there's nobody or no traffic or nothing going on, yeah, they're gonna work a scrape. So
Mhm.
with the good, making the property thick and great for deer came the bad of not seeing the deer.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's an interesting observation. Yeah, that is.
You get tired of your neighbors telling you, oh, I saw the big 8 tonight, or oh, I saw the big 10 tonight. It's like, I have never physically laid eyes on that buck. I got trail cam pictures of him. He's been all over my property, but I've never physically seen him. Right.
Yeah.
But
I think there's an interesting anomaly of when someone buys property and they make all these different improvements. I hate to say it, but I do think the neighbors benefit the most.
I think in a lot of cases they do. I mean, Don always said the only way you're going to kill a mature buck is if he's bedding on your property. Because if he's bedding on the neighbors and he's not getting up out of his bed until right before dark, I mean, if he's really smart and he's not going to expose himself, he's not going to make it to your property in shooting light. And I think in a lot of cases that is spot on, 100% solid advice. And so I've got the thick, I've got the places to hide a big buck. The problem is I'm in that thick and I'm driving around that thick stuff frequently enough that he's further back. What I've come to accept is, yeah, I'm not going to have a 6-year-old buck bedded on my property because I just spend too much time on it, whether it's, whatever I'm doing. Well, but I love the habitat stuff as much as the deer hunting itself. So
I respect that. Yeah. Well, no, I appreciate your time. Is there any other parting thoughts or words of encouragement for someone out there?
So I'm going to tell you, I want you to do something on cellular trail cameras. I have learned the last couple of years that I'm depending on them too much. And I think I've actually screwed my hunting up with the lack of information that I'm getting from the cameras, hoping to get more to make my move. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I heard Lee Lakowski recently say on a podcast, if you get one picture of a mature buck on your property, you better be hunting him, because you've proven through the photo that he's around, right? Or he's at least using your property sometime. Well, I'll get a picture of that buck and maybe 2 or 3 times in the same week, but I feel like I'm looking for something even more than that. And so then I'm not hunting. My wife and I bought 50 acres right across the border in Illinois during COVID. We got a pretty good deal on the property. The guy was ready to move, and it's turned out to be, it's way better property than Indiana just because of the management of the state management. I mean, you can kill 2 bucks over there, and I got bigger bucks on that property than I've ever had on this property. Holding out all the stops and trying for years not to shoot good ones. But anyway,
that's a tough topic, because I think we all know that you can ask yourself and say, am I relying on them too much? And if you think the answer is yes, the answer is absolutely. I've fallen victim to that. And last year I made a really conscious decision to try not to do so. And I felt like I had a lot better success. Now, how do I attribute that to, putting in sentences and words for it to make sense? I can't, but
right.
I would agree.
I'm not saying don't use cameras. Cameras are invaluable. They're changed awesome. Hunting. They allow you to take inventory, see what's still around, whether it's right before hunting season or who's made it through the hunting season, who's still alive after after the winter, and maybe who's still around now that they've shed antlers or whatever. But I think it's also easy to and I feel like I don't feel like I've wasted a couple years, but I feel like I definitely relied on them the last couple years too much. The biggest buck that I ever shot, I shot it right around the corner. I had no idea it was there, had no pictures of him. I'm sitting in a tree stand, and 177-inch, 5.5-year-old giant walks through. I stick an arrow through him, had no idea he was even there. I was just like, holy cow, where did this come from? And, I can tell you, every tattoo, every white spot, every double throat patch, every ear that's got a tick on it of every deer on my property. But, yeah. So,
well,
don't rely on trail cameras too much, or don't let it don't let it dictate how you hunt, I
Yeah,
guess.
easier said than done. I think everyone's aware of that, and
Totally.
it becomes
Yeah.
challenging. But I really
Yeah.
appreciate your time here
You
and
got
kind
it.
of really breaking
It's
down
been
your
fun.
experience. Yeah, it's super cool. If people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way to do that?
Well, I'm horrible with social media, I'll admit. I'm the Habitat guys on Facebook, and I do have, YouTube and Instagram. I don't post often. Phil Lincoln on Facebook and the Habitat guys on Facebook are where I've done the most stuff. I know nobody uses those. That's an old person thing, but anyway, that's who I am. I'm in Southwest Indiana, right on the Illinois border, so I'm right on the right close to the river.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Phil. I appreciate it. I look forward to
You
staying
got
in
it.
touch and hearing how your season goes.
Sounds good, Jake. Thanks again.
There you guys have it. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I want to say thank you so much to Onyx for supporting the Land Podcast. Exciting news with the Onyx integration with Moultrie. Obviously, they just launched the Edge 3, the Edge Solar, some really great options that are really affordable. If you're adding cameras for this upcoming season, we're going to be having Buckland Funding here on the show very soon to talk about the current environment of interest rates, land, what people need to know when they're shopping for a mortgage. I know sometimes those aren't the most exciting, but to me, I'm kind of lame. I do enjoy talking with lenders and learning all the different things that can help make a purchase work really well. And having a good lender is the beginning of buying land, and we'll be with Buckland Funding soon. I want to say thank you so much to Hawk Optics, Painted Arrow, and ASM Labs for supporting the Land Podcast. Hope you guys have a great rest of your week. We'll see you next time.